Welcome to Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators, and thank you for joining us. On this podcast, we'll explore leadership, innovation, and growth in the life sciences sector. I'm Don Alexander, founder of GeneCoda, a boutique executive search firm dedicated to connecting visionary leaders with life sciences companies shaping the future of therapeutics and scientific tools. On each episode, we'll dive into candid conversations with industry pioneers, uncovering strategies, insights, and real-world experiences that drive success in our industry. If you're interested in presenting as a guest of a future episode, please scan the barcode image at the top of my video frame and follow the instructions. Now, I'm pleased to be joined by Chris Gropp, the CEO of Trialogics. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, Don. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Great to have you here, Chris. Chris is a seasoned leader in clinical trial technology with more than 2 decades of experience advancing how research is conducted and how data is captured in global studies. As the founder of Trialogics, he has been at the forefront of developing integrated solutions across eConsent, IRT, IWRS, ePRO, eCOA, and remote device management, helping sponsors and CROs run more efficient patient-centered trials. What sets Chris apart is his practical solutions-oriented approach. He understands that no two trials are the same and has built Trialogics around flexibility, speed, and real-world usability, bridging the gap between complex technology and the needs of patients, sites, and study teams. Chris is a strong advocate for modernizing clinical research through mobile and cloud-based platforms with a focus on improving client engagement, patient engagement, data quality, and study outcomes. So again, Chris, welcome.
Thank you again.
Absolutely. Let's get into your career journey and leadership philosophy. So Chris, what initially drew you into the clinical trials segment of the market and life sciences technology space?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if I started out traditionally like everyone else did. I worked my way through college at JP Morgan Chase credit card department. I was working in their marketing IT area. And it was this, we're talking early 90s, late 90s. And they have a lot of technologies, a lot of systems that they were utilized at that point for speed, because obviously your speed is very important to when users are trying to process their credit cards or get a credit line increase and so forth. I did that for quite a while. There's actually something we were taking processes are taking 3 to 6 months to complete, and we were then utilizing new ways of looking at it and getting into this process down to 48 hours. So it was an interesting experience, much different than life sciences, but it was definitely gave you a good introduction to technology. From there, like a lot of people around that time, talking Y2K area, I went into consulting. And then one of my jobs was actually working with a merger of Glaxo Wellcome and SmithKline Beecham. And I got brought in to help facilitate that merger. And from there, that really taught me much more out of the pharmaceutical industry work. And I actually had a colleague at another financial services firm, and he actually to come in and help him at a CRO located in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I went down there and we helped rebuild the systems, utilizing some things I've learned in the past, not only from the GSK days, but also my JP Morgan days. And we started integrating a lot of those systems. That's where we really started putting together what was then called IWRS, could utilize a phone as well as some patient-reported outcomes. And that was a great way to actually learn that part of the business. And we transitioned that to another company. And from there, we kept building new processes and trying to integrate it further. That was my entry into the clinical trial world.
That's great. That's great. So some very large company experience processing, understanding how things work. Before founding Trialogics, what experiences shaped your understanding of the challenges sponsors and CROs face?
Well, that's where the experience at the CRO really helped me.
Mhm.
When you're working at JP Morgan Chase in the back office or in the financial part of GlaxoSmithKline, you're not really interacting with the daily operations or sites or subjects. But when you're at a CRO and you're actually working with IWRS at that point and eCOA, and ePROs, then you really have to have a hands-on approach to working with the sites, the patients, because they're the front lines. So a lot of that, a lot of that interaction I have with that CRO and building the systems from the ground up, reviewing the protocols, building the requirements, and then putting out those requirements and testing the system and validating the system. By that point, now the system may be in production. It's a daily operations with the site staff that you have to interact with, and that's where you really learn on the operation of clinical trials, and from all that knowledge that you gather from hands-on, actually working on a daily basis with them, seeing what you do well, what you can improve upon, what their needs are, and then putting that in the future systems is invaluable.
That's great. We've come a long way since the days of initial IVRS, it seems.
Yes,
What
we
ga
have.
what gap in the clinical trial ecosystem convinced you that Trialogics needed to exist?
Well, even when I first started, we were, you had separate systems for everything. You had the IVRS system, which eventually translated into IWRS. Now they call it IRT, and now RTSM. Those systems, they were isolated. They're in their own little silo. And then you would have, patient-reported outcomes, or eCOA, and then they were in their silo. And then eConsent was in its silo. But a lot of these systems, you would expect the sites to go in there and each one independently and put in the same information in each system. And then that inherently causes problems. You could forget to put it in some other system, and then the process fails, or you put a wrong birth date in this system and you have to go back and fix it. So putting those like systems together, it just makes a lot of sense. So from the beginning, from day one, Trialogics, when we built our platform, we integrated those three systems. And so now you're not asking the site to put in three different, the same data point, three different systems. It all integrates and flows at once.
Excellent, excellent. As a founder, Chris, what or how has your leadership style evolved as the company, as Trialogics has grown?
Well, I had a lot of really good operational experience, at JP Morgan Chase, because I was running several ops departments, but it was with internal clients for the most part. What you have to learn to adjust as a founder is not only you're running operations, you're in charge of the operations, but you're dealing with not internal and external people. And those people they're not sponsors, they're all sponsors, they're CROs, they're sites, and they're patients. So you have your internal resources that you have to respond to, but also multiple external resources, and each one of them have different requirements or different needs that you're constantly trying to work with. And on top of that, of course, as a founder, you get the fun part. You have to run, responsible for revenue and sales and finances, and make sure you're adhering to the regulations. So you have all these different things that are reporting to you, and you have to be responsible for all of that. And it's a burden. But the one good thing about Trialogics is, we've had a good team. We've had a solid team for most people been with me from day one, and that's helped a lot. So, as a founder, picking those great resources in the beginning, learning their strengths, and then helping them to utilize those strengths correctly, and then knowing that you have to deal with different personalities and different segments of your business is what you really need to do as a founder.
Absolutely. Sounds like it's been good continuity.
It has.
Let's yeah, yeah, let's switch gears a little bit and look at Trialogics as a company. I guess for listeners who may not be familiar, what exactly do platforms like eConsent, IRT, and eCOA do kind of within a clinical trial?
Sure. I mean, at a high level, e-consent is essentially that we've taken the consent form and we've made it electronic, and of course the benefits of this, you have much greater compliance. It helps logistically. You're not sending out paper forms of the consent to all the sites. You're not constantly have to, make sure that every site has the correct version. It's all handled electronically. And then also when this, something is needed to perform a consent or even a reconsent, it's electronic, and so you can always be assured that they are actually, confirming that, reading it, understanding it, and then signing off properly. If there is a miss or a gap, the system automatically is sending out alerts as reminders to various sites and sponsor and CRO resources say, hey, we're missing this part of the consent. And this actually helps. This all goes back to helping the sites, because you don't, you're ultimately trying to make sure they shepherd their subjects properly through the systems and correctly. So if there is something, this is guidance for them. Say, hey, this subject needs to do their consent before they go into the IRT or before they go into their patient-reported outcomes. And that takes us to the IRT process. And the IRT is a very complicated system. It does so much. But in general, it's responsible for clinical supply management, responsible for randomization and drug assignment, visit management. And so we're doing all that, working with the depots, working with the sites, making sure the sites have enough drug to randomize subjects, and then also performing all the needed visits for resupply as well as you're adding the subject into the system at initial screening, screen fails if necessary, the randomization process, the visit management, and the treatment, all those normal functionalities within the IRT system. So we perform that, and that's where now you understand why the consent up front. If we have the consent, we know the consent has been performed, but then we can allow that subject will then process correctly without missing consent as needed. And at some point in there, if patient-reported outcomes are being captured or the questionnaire is being captured, then the eCOA system will kick in electronically, and it's automatically based upon the status or study day, then sending the proper questionnaires off to the subject, either on their own device or a tablet that we provide as well. And then they'll be alerted to when they have to complete that. And all this happens, in a seamless process in accordance to the protocol.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there, for sure. And it seems like an integrated system makes a lot of sense. Um, as you mentioned, just to follow on with that, I think earlier clinical trials have historically relied on these fragmented kind of segments or buckets. In addition to maybe what you've already talked about, what else makes an integrated approach more effective?
Well, once we have that information, so now we've collected a lot of this information that's needed not only in our system to do our job or do our functionality, but in other systems as well. So we typically work with our CROs or sponsor partners, and we'll send that information in real time over to the EDC system. And that helps the site once again, because now if we're sending over the subject ID, we're sending over randomization numbers or any other information they need, we can automatically send it to those systems, and now the site is responsible for them putting something else in that system that they could possibly put in an error or forget to do. So if we have the data, if we're the source of that data, and if we're able to, we'll send it right over to the ZDC systems. And once again, all this is trying to help the sites do their jobs, because you have to be conscious of the fact that the sites are working on multiple systems. These protocols are complex most of the time. And it's not only that trial, they're working on multiple trials. So anytime you can reduce that burden and send that information off to other systems, even if it's not Trialogics systems, off to another third-party system like EDC, like reimbursement systems, like CTMS or anything else, then we'll do it. We'll work with our sponsor to do that for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense, Chris. Now, Trialogics has focused heavily on remote device management and mobile data capture. Why is that becoming so important?
Well, there's been a big push for decentralization. When you have, subjects can't always come back to the site. There may be, an issue that actually come to the site, or they don't need it. They don't need it just to come to the site, just to supply them data. They're not going to do a lab or something else. So they have the ability to remotely capture information. And we've worked very well with some key CROs and sponsors that will supply the subjects with a Samsung tablet, for example, or we always supply with a mobile data plan, and it works not just US but global as well. And we cover all that. We send the subjects home with those tablets. They log on, they do alerts, they do the questionnaires. Other parts, they can launch third-party apps. They can launch a video capture, an audio file. So there's other things that we can do through that tablet because we control it to capture any other information. And then we've worked with several sponsors who are not only capturing, questionnaires or things on our tablet, but other devices that may be Bluetooth or integrated in other ways. It could be a scale, could be a thermometer, things along those things that are other things that are necessary for the trial that they want to capture. And we're seeing that's increasing more and more. And then on top, obviously, you have watches for activity reports. And we've had a great relationship with Samsung Health, for example, where they allow us to integrate with their technologies that we'll send out, and that information will come back to us in real time, and then the sponsors, CROs can review that as needed.
That's great. Yeah, decentralized trials seem to be becoming more prevalent, perhaps with competition for patients. I'm not sure, but curious, how has the shift toward decentralized clinical trials changed the expectations of both sponsors and CROs?
Well, it's funny, in our industry, they're slow to adopt new technology. I mean, we're heavily regulated, so it's understandable. We still talk about a lot of paper capture for a lot of things, a lot of manual processes, and that's still going on. But what we've worked with, like I said, we've had some very, very good CROs we work with and sponsors who they've started doing it. They started, utilizing, our technology, the integrated approach, the ability to capture remote information. And it's kind of like at first it might be a little bit, let's see how it works and we'll try it. But then once they see it and they say, oh my God, we didn't even know this existed. You could do these kind of things. And they just love it. So the expectation, might have started out kind of low, or, let's see kind of thing, to like they see it works, they love it. And so the next trials they've done to them, now they expect a lot more, which is great, which is exactly what you want to have, you know. So that's been my experience. But it's been slow because that's just the nature of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. The adoption curve does often take a while.
It does.
Let's talk a little bit about the technology, the perspective of scaling it in clinical research. So as you mentioned, I think earlier, clinical trials involve strict regulatory oversight. So how do you design technology that remains compliant while still being flexible to to the needs of the site?
So from my perspective, when I first started out, when we would start a new trial, we would physically have to buy hardware, and that hardware would sit in an office, and you would have your processes to make sure that the audit trail is running, that it was up and running, and it was a high cost and a high burden. Where we've seen with obviously with the introduction of more cloud-based data centers and Microsoft Azure, who we utilize regularly, that has been such a godsend for us. We could not do what we do today without those kind of data centers, without those kind of technologies. So we can spin up new environments, new trials automatically, literally within hours. And then all the compliance and the audit trails that we need to adhere to our regulations are done automatically within the systems. Any kind of report that you need to see from our audits that we routinely have to go through, we can pull that automatically off the system, and you see a much better level of compliance and data and audit trails that we could have supplied 20 years ago. So there's no way we could do what we do today as quickly as we do today if we were still operating we were 20 years ago. And that allows us, when we have to go to our auditors and supply them the information, it's easiest to download it, provide it to them, and they can review it accordingly. So it's been a game changer as far as we're concerned.
Absolutely, yeah, and especially as it pertains perhaps to the next question, which is what operational challenges, I guess, arise when thinking about global trials, supporting global trials across different regions and regulatory environments.
Well, what's great is to piggyback off of what I was just saying about the technology. So we've reduced a huge burden upon my team through technology, through utilizing our data centers, our global data centers. So now that allows us to focus even more on what the real challenges are. The real challenges are nowadays are what they should be, focusing on the sites and the subjects. So now if we know that our technology is being monitored and run properly, so now my support team can go back to what did we build? What is needed for the sites and subjects? What are we doing, correctly? What can we improve upon? Taking all that input in, talking to the sites and the subjects, answering the support calls on a more of a human nature, because that's ultimately what we're doing. The technology is great, but technology is there to help us serve, our clients. And those clients, a lot of times, because we talk about the various resources, are the sites and are the subjects. And if we can't have technology improve that, then we're doing something wrong. So to your question, reducing those burdens and challenges of global trials, we can now have it because we've taken a large portion of those burdens of technology off the table for the most part, and it focuses all of our resources on operations and helping them directly.
Absolutely. Many companies struggle with trial startup timelines and site burden. Where do you, as you're navigating the different clients that you all serve, where do you see the biggest inefficiencies still today?
Well, it depends on the trial. I mean, everything's the one thing we do know is, as most people in this industry will tell you, there's always a challenge up front in trial startup, but it could be various different ones. You could have waiting for a protocol improvement or an amendment to a protocol, or funding, or site start, trying to bring in the sites to actually start the trial. So a lot you have different challenges. Where it usually impacts us is around the requirement changes. We through our technology, we can spin up the environments very fast. So we're good there. But now, we still have to address all the requirements that we've been given from the sponsor and CROs to produce these trials. And when there is a requirement change because of protocol amendment, then we have to adjust accordingly. Now, technology, once again, helps us make those changes quickly and efficiently, and also, being able to document them all and get the proper sign off for implementation. So, but that is it, it does adjust the timelines, somewhat, but we can help, mitigate that through our technology. But then going forward, with the other challenges of trial startup, we can't always address other things, but the ones that we can address around technology, getting our requirements and our systems spun up in timely manner, we can mitigate pretty well because through our technology.
Gotcha. Excellent. And we talked to some degree about some of the various partnerships with Microsoft and Samsung. I mean, how do partnerships with CROs, device manufacturers, or others influence your growth strategy?
Well, I said we had a great partnership with Microsoft and from day one. We have centered around them for all of our data center needs. That's been great. We meet with them regularly. We're always making our adjustments for that. Anytime they have something new or they can help us improve, we'll implement it. The other part is around Samsung Health. We utilize Samsung Health a lot for any kind of device trials, for our tablet needs, any kind of other device that may be needed for a trial. So that's been another one. But our other partnerships, as far as our CRO partnerships are, working with various depots that we're always trying to integrate with, working with other companies around maybe doing reimbursements. These are things that we take, that we feel important as well. So our technology partners like Microsoft and Samsung, but then also the actual ones for our trial needs around depots and reimbursements and EDC vendors. We're always trying to talk to them. What can we do better? How can we improve that? So that's something we're always trying to improve upon.
That's great. That's great. Let's also talk a little bit about the future of clinical trial technology, as well as what trials might look like 5 or 10 years from now. Looking ahead, you recently, Chris, introduced an AI assistant called Tria, I believe within the Trialogics platform. This is an AI assistant. How will AI change the way clinical trials are managed?
Well, the one thing is what you're seeing now with more integration and more data is just that. You're seeing more data. That's important data. But there's a lot of it. Where we focus, Tree on is around, once again, around the operational. So you're seeing this incoming data, more data from patients, all coming in. But how can we help the sites and the sponsors understand and go through that data in a timely and efficient manner? And that's where Tria comes in. Tria can allow them to go in there and say, this is how much drug you need at site 100, or these are new questionnaires that the questionnaires we're expecting from this subject. and that allows, once again, it's allowing operations to become more efficiently. And that's so we've carved that piece out for Tria. We worked with Microsoft on our Tria AI, and we worked internally for quite a while because we wanted to focus directly on what has a deep impact for our clients. Now I've seen overall how AI is working for the trial master file and upfront protocol, and that's great. And I think that will continue to help. But operationally, the information that we're supplying, because once again, between eConsent, between IRT, between eCOA, we're capturing a lot of data. And with the introduction of remote medical devices, um, watches, anything like that, you're just increasing that data coming in. So how do you mine it? How do you report upon it in a more efficient manner? How do for the sponsor sees, the results of a trial, the CROs see it operationally, how it's going, and the sites know what they have to do today. And that's where Tree is going to come in because we have the data and we're going to get more of it as in the future. So we got to help present it in a better manner for them. And that's where we really focus our AI tools. They said, AI for the sake of saying you do AI, and that doesn't really help anybody. So they've taken a narrow focus on what we're rolling Tree out for, and I believe it's going to be very successful. We've had great results early on with it.
Great, fantastic. So, what areas of clinical research, I guess, still rely maybe too heavily on manual processes, maybe those that could be automated?
Oh, quite a few. To be honest with you, Don,
Yeah,
there's still we're people who will do manual drug supply, who will do manual randomization. Paper-based diaries are still prevalent in the industry, but this goes back to what we talked about earlier. We're slow to adopt, but it's also people are a little wary about it. But one of the other challenges are, especially with remote devices or wearables, there is an upfront cost. This data is going to cost. There's things that technology can help lessen the cost in some ways, but ultimately, if I'm supplying additional hardware, additional remote devices or wearables that come with a mobile data plan, there is a fixed cost of that. The integration and the upfront cost of setting that up is a higher cost than doing just handing someone some paper, of course. But then what our clients have learned is, yes, an upfront cost, but you're quickly paying dividends down the line because you don't have as many queries. You're not redoing data. You don't have any support issues because things are integrated. You've lessened the burden across trial. You've come up, a much more efficient way of doing it. As opposed to doing with the paper-based or manual processes, you spend a lot more of the time in the back end, going through and possibly fixing things or looking at it in an unclear way and trying to figure out exactly what happened. You don't have as high compliance as you do with integrated systems if you're doing a paper-based system.
right, absolutely. So, you mentioned decentralization earlier. Presumably, trials will continue to become more decentralized. So, what new challenges will sponsors need to solve, do you think, as they continue that journey?
Well, I think when sponsors they decide that they want to capture more data, to decentralize more. The thought is I'm going to be able to have more information be provided, that not come directly from the sites, but remotely from the patients and subjects themselves. And this goes back to like you're asking them to capture more and more data. So how we've tried to like maybe mitigate some of those possible issues is that supplying a device to them with a mobile data plan. That's everything. Here's everything they need. It's all on that tablet. If you need us to make an adjustment, we can do it remotely. So that's one of the core things that we do. But that data that you're collecting, this goes back to what we talked about with TRIA. Now you're going to have a lot more data coming in, and a lot fast, 24/7, 365, and that's coming in all the time. So now I need tools around better reporting, looking at that information, making sure it's correct. And so I think that's going to be a huge challenge in going forward. So the increased cost, for the devices themselves, which you're hopefully going to lower by not having as many site visits, but also the increased information burden that you're going to have. And then hopefully we can alleviate that with better tools like AI and TRIA.
Like a entry, absolutely. So, you're just looking out again, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, what do you think a modern clinical trial would look like at that point in time? Maybe what's different about things today?
Well, I think, you're following the trends. You're going to have, technology is going to keep, increasing. So you're going to have less manual processes and less paper-based. So you're going to have a much higher efficiencies in general. I believe you're going to have much more information being captured remotely, that you don't see right now. You'll see less site visits, but you'll also see much more information. I think it's just going to continue down the path we are going right now. I don't see anything interfering with that. But to do that, we have to raise awareness of what can possibly be done, because we're still talking to people, today that who don't really realize, what we do, or why it's beneficial, and they see it and then they understand it. So that as that information spreads, that people can learn more about what we can do, then that's going to keep that path going forward. Because ultimately the goal is to produce these clinical trials in a much more efficient manner, and then get the needed drugs and therapies out there in a better, more quality, efficient way. So I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. I don't see that trend, stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So, Chris, we probably have some founders or innovators on our podcast here today. What advice would you give to founders or innovators working to modernize rather their clinical research infrastructure?
Well, depending upon their background, what I always recommend, if you're a small organization, or just a single person, figure out, start small. There are a lot of pieces in this industry that need improvement. That then a new approach, or a new way of looking at it can help. So find those little things, improve upon them greatly, and then focus all your effort on taking care of those first, key customers. Now that's ultimately important. It's a small industry, word of mouth, and how you take care of those customers, those first people who sign up for your solution, is going to be incredibly important for your growth pattern going forward. So, and listen to the operations, listen to the sites, listen to the subjects, because they're the key to understanding, what you're doing, what you do well, and what you can improve upon. Because ultimately that's going to help you be successful.
Absolutely. That's great, Chris. If listeners want to learn more about Trialogics, where should they start?
Well, of course, trialogics.com. You can go in there. You can contact us directly through that. It'll eventually find its way to me. But then I'm more than happy to talk to people if they have any questions.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you. Well, that wraps up this episode of Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators. I appreciate you tuning in and hope you found today's conversation valuable. If you enjoyed the discussion, please be sure to leave a review and share it with your network. Please also mark your calendars for April 6th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time with Charles Legg, the COO of CureLab Oncology. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.